others looked at him. Jack said, "Oh, Fred, you're bloody right. We ought to put old Churchill in a ring with Hitler. Give the buggers knives and make them fight their bloody war themselves." Fat Charlie said, "There wouldn't be no wars if politicians had to fight their bloody selves." And then they got back to the football bloody score. This second one is something that happened to me. I was going out one night to a boys' club, and there must have been an air raid, but the real danger to us was not the bombs, but the shells from the anti-aircraft guns that exploded. And one of them exploded not too far above me, and it was like a cloud of golden rain. It's called shrapnel. Surprised, I stood and watched shrapnel falling in the street, coming towards me like a burst of rain. One piece was beautiful, jagged and shiny, but much too hot to hold. It would have been a souvenir. Now, the next one is about my nanny, who was my mother's mother. And I was brought up to call her Nanny, and I really loved my nanny. Nanny gave me my biscuit. She was in her long black dress and her white lace cap. My mom and Auntie Rosie wanted her to sleep beneath the stairs. The paper said this was safer. "Nobody ain't gonna make me sleep anywhere but in me own bed," said my nanny. I could understand the last one, she went on, with the young Kaiser. Kaiser Willie, they called him, Queen Victoria's grandson. Kind of family quarrel, understandable like. Every family has its fallings out. Of course, I didn't like them Zeppelins with their bombs, nor lining up the taters, the beaten taters, mind you, but I could understand it. After all, our kings and queens, they always has their wars. But who's this Hitler fella? Now, I'm going to start reading pieces from the memoir. And most of them are set in Edmonton, which is a district in the north of London. I was born very close to the Tower, which any of you have been to London, seen the Tower of London. But bit by bit, my family moved north, and we got to Edmonton. It had been a country village with a green. In 1782, William Cowper wrote a poem about John Gilpin's ride from London to the Bell Pub in Edmonton. We had to learn it in school. In 1936, when I was 9, the pub was still open, but the green had become a market with a patch of grass behind railings. This memory came just before the abdication of King Edward VIII. It was very popular. The slump, English for the Great Depression, was beginning to end as rearmament put money into people's pockets. Mom, Sister Renee and I met Dad at his tram stop and went over the railway to the Green. On our left was the Angel Pub. People with tankards of ale talked happily and laughed. Decorated booths sold seafood on little saucers, delicate pink shrimps, black-shelled winkles, whelks and mussels, jellied eels, all draped with seaweed, emitting a glorious ocean smell. We crossed the Green to the market. A communist flag flew on a speaker's platform at one end of the railings round the small remnant of the old village green. A black some people listen to the speakers. Shops and stalls sold apple fritters, roasted chestnuts, meat pies, eel and mash, fish and chips, peas pudding, hokey pokey, and sarsaparilla. That was just the food. It was a big market. Customers strolled around, talking, shouting, laughing. Dance music drifted from a wireless shop. Harsh electric light from shop windows and the yellow oil lamps on carts mingled with the soft white gaslight from street lamps. The political speakers seemed far away, an occasional small cheer from those listening. Other people ignored them. They'd come to buy things, and there was lots to buy on Saturday night. Salesmen had to work hard to move their wares. One peddler clambered on his barrow. He balanced himself behind columns of biscuit tins. He paused, then raised one tin. With a beguiling smile, he invited us to observe the picture painted in tasteful shades of brown on the lid. Look, he cried out, King Edward VIII. The moneybags in the city wanted to dump Edward, the papers said, because of his romance with Mrs. Simpson. My dad didn't give a damn whom he married, said the king was a friend of the working man, got along with the Germans, and wouldn't have a war. Mum and Dad watched the seller, and I stood beside him. Cost you £1 a tin in the fancy shops, the peddler shouted. Good, but don't bother to hold up your pound notes, 'cause I ain't going to take £1 off any of you. He paused. Not even if you begs me. Dad laughed, a lot of men laughed, another pause. I ain't even going to ask half £1, the salesman called out. He spoke East End Jewish. Most of us in Edmonton were Cockneys, and his accent was much like ours. Shut up, you bleeding Jew boy, a passerby shouted. I turned to look, but the vendor ignored him. He had tins of biscuits to sell. How about 5 bob, he said to himself. He seemed to ponder the amount. He singled out a thin man standing at the front of the crowd. 5 bob will be fair enough, wouldn't it, matey? A measly $1 a tin? $1 in England meant 5 shillings. The man became nervous, didn't respond. The vendor pretended to think about the price, then shook his head. I must be crazy. I must be stark staring bonkers, he said. But I'm going to let you have a tin for $1/2. Only $1/2, mind. Only $1/2, just 2 shillings and 6pence. Don't tell the Bedlam docs. They'll come in their white coats and lock me up. Bedlam was where crazy people were sent. The crowd laughed, but everybody wanted someone else to buy first. The vendor had to get that first person to buy. He knew that. Some barra boys planted a stooge in the crowd to be a pigeon, to be the first buyers. But Cockneys were hard to fool. Tell you what, the peddler said, very slowly, doubtfully, it's going to mean the poorhouse for me and the missus and me 5 little ones. He looked at us with such a doleful face that I felt sorry. All the people round the barrow grew silent. The political shouts seemed to grow louder. Dad thumped my shoulder to tell me it was just an act. The vendor bit his lower lip as if to scrub his courage. Then he shouted cheerfully, first one to speak up gets a tin for a shilling. 1 shilling, 1 thin bob, 2 tiny tanners, 4 little threepenny bits. Only a shilling. Who's going to be the luckier? Will it be you, my dear? I mean the pretty lady over there. What's asking our hubby to get us some of them nice biscuits for tea in bed tonight? tin of biscuits was a nice thing to take home, especially for men who've been drinking in the pub. Just one boblet for old Edward. The peddler knew the crowd was in his hand, and he looked straight at the thin man in the front row again. Think how nice he'll look on your mantle, he said. He held up the tin at arm's length, gazed at the picture as if in trance. Mum laughed and Dad held up his shilling. Others held up their money. Everyone laughed. The vendor laughed with us. He turned the tin round to display the unpainted bottom, which shone like a mirror, vacant and empty. And here's Mrs. Simpson, he said. She comes for free. Because of his love for Mrs. Simpson, King Edward was abdicating the throne of England. A harsh, angry voice cut through the laughing. Keep your mouth shut about our king and his ladies, you boy. The crowd fell silent. Shillings came down. Dad gripped my shoulder hard, pulled Mum's close. The harsh voice chanted, Yid, Yid, Yid. Other people joined in. We gotta get rid of the Yid. 4 black-shirted men came from the passage there, knocked the piles of biscuit tins to the ground, and shouted insults at the vendor. He began to put his tins back in their cardboard boxes, pretending not to notice them. Dad pulled us away, but I wanted to see what would happen. On the other side of the road, from the crowd outside the Angel, that was where we came in over the bridge, a voice shouted clear above the commotion, coppers are coming. The Reds threw their things in a car, squeezed in and started the engine. The black shirts didn't have a car. They just grabbed their flag and started to run. The Reds stopped their car beside them and helped them stand on the running board. People cheered this show of English sportsmanship as the overloaded car struggled towards the high street. Police arrived as the car turned the corner. Now that was a few years went by, and a lot happened in the next few years. Malcolm Campbell won world land and speed records in his Bluebird. The Supermarine Company won the airspeed record, the Schneider Trophy. And the Thetis submarine disaster in the Irish Sea, which you probably haven't heard of, but was in every person in England's mind at the time. The BBC carried it virtually non-stop until the last person trapped in that submarine could be heard rapping in Morse code on the shell. And then it was silent. And the last thing was we were all issued gas masks. Fingers aren't good at moving paper. We didn't know Saturday would be the last day of peace. The 2nd of September, 1939. I was 12 and in secondary school. Dad and I went with Mum shopping that day to carry the bags home. Large screen Marconi TV sets filled the windows of the wireless shop, replacing the smaller Baird models. A Radio Times contest to name viewers, TV viewers, was won by Lookers In. The second prize went to someone who put Kelly gazers. When we got home, my little sister Renee had lit the coke oven to get hot water for a bath. The kettle was boiling, so Mum made tea and sent me to buy shrimps and winkles. That was like a treat for supper. People were outside in the street staring up. We joined them and looked up spellbound. The sky was full of color. let out in one long sigh the enormous breath we had been holding. Nobody had seen a sky like that in London. It's a sign, a warning, an old lady said. Does it mean war? Another woman asked. Mum held Reenie tightly. People talked quietly, whispered as the red faded. Let's go, Dad said. Mum made fresh tea and Dad switched on the wireless to hear about the colours. The BBC didn't mention them. Dad was annoyed. Wonder what caused those colours. Could it be meteors, Dad, I suggested, or the northern lights? Dad shook his head. More likely, the end of the world's coming. Next morning was Sunday, and I helped Dad in the garden. Mum kept the wireless on, hoping the BBC would tell us about the colours. There was nothing in the News of the World, our Sunday paper. Later, Mum pulled us into the kitchen. Wait for an important announcement, the BBC repeated over and over. In those days, BBC announcers didn't have names and spoke with exactly the same accent. We sat round the kitchen table and Mum poured tea. The announcer introduced the Right Honourable Neville Chamberlain, our Prime Minister. Mum slumped, her head thrown back, mouth open, one hand on her chest. Dad reached out to fine-tune the wireless, but remembered he usually lost the station when he did that. Mr. Chamberlain told us we had declared war on Germany. This surprised Dad. He didn't think the war would come so soon. He thought rich people would wait a while before they started another war. The announcer came back to remind us of the blackout and the need to cover all windows. Dad sent me upstairs for a torch while he went to the shed to get blackout panels. The government told us to just tack black paper across the windows, but Dad called this botching, shoddy work, and tacked paper across lathe frames. I switched the torch on to be sure it worked, ran downstairs and out into the yard to Dad. Turn it off, Dad yelled, as though the sky was full of German bombers looking to see my light. I fumbled the switch. Dad slapped me impatiently on the head. In that instant, just as if it triggered a switch in my skull, an air raid siren screamed. The scream came from one direction, then another, echoed in crazy ways, and finally merged into one unbelievably loud scream that came from all over the sky and everywhere else. The world screamed, the pitch climbed, my body tightened. It climbed higher, climbed again, kept climbing. I couldn't bear it. Then it suddenly fell, and I fell with it, small and completely helpless. I still feel sick to this day when I hear a siren. Dad pushed me into the house, lie down on the floor by the staircase. The newspaper that said that was the best place to be if you didn't have a cellar. Mum squeezed Reenie between her and the wall. I lay down behind them. Dad fetched gas masks from the front door. Each was in a cardboard box with a string to carry it. The mask, black rubber, with a tin can muzzle supposed to filter the air, and a celluloid window to look through. Better put 'em on, Dad said, just in case. Most people didn't expect the mask to work. Anyway, the paper said the new German poison gas could be set afire, so we'd be burned to death anyway. I strapped on my mask, and Mum pulled one over Reenie's face, but Reenie began to scream. Dad was still on his feet. He looked down and shook a fist at the ceiling. down on the floor behind me, stretched his strong laboring man's arm across the three of us, and squeezed us all together. Mum gave up trying to put the mask on Renee. She hadn't taken her own mask out of the box. Renee's screams became whimpers. The visor on my mask fogged up. I couldn't see anything, so I took it off. It probably wouldn't stop the gas anyway. The sirens howled again, but this time it was the steady tone of the old clear signal. Next day, the BB said it was a false alarm. No air raid. They didn't mention the marvelous colors in the sky. Yeah. I'll skip over evacuation and all the things that went on in the next few years to when I got my first job. When I was 16, my first job was in a factory tropicalizing instruments for Spitfires headed for the South Pacific. We used to get visits from airmen. The pilots told us that the Spitfire was the best plane to fight the Zero in. And I really don't know it, but I had some trouble with the factory bosses. And at 17, I got a better job. It was at the government laboratory with a capital letter of the. Founded by Henry VIII in the year of our Lord 1512 to raise the quality of English ale. The inspector in leather breeches would pour a jug of ale on a bench and then sit on it. He waited until the ale dried. If the chair came with him when he got up, they figured the ale was good. But over the centuries, the laboratory acquired these tasks. In 1944, the Germans switched from B-1 flying bombs to V-2 rockets, the first ballistic missiles. The V comes from the German word Vergeltung, which means sort of return punishment. My job was to analyze the rocket metal on a spectrograph. After an explosion, an army dispatch rider brought me rocket fragments. One threw his bag on the bench before even pushing his goggles up. I teased him for a laugh. Another gas main blew up. The BBC first pretended the V-2s were gas explosions, but the rockets came steadily. One hit a tall building on Holborn Viaduct near my lab, left many dead. It shook flakes from my ceiling into the sample I was working on. So I had to restart the analysis. The dispatch rider drummed impatiently on the lab bench, and I could hardly sign the report before he dashed away with it. Next morning, I came out of the Holborn Tube, pale sunshine. Crowds of people lined both sides of the Kingsway, watching a car come slowly up from the Strand. Not a shabby Austin, not a Humber Snipe in khaki or RAF blue, not a politician's black limousine. It was unnatural. A brand new, gleaming, cherry red sports convertible with white leather seats and mirror chrome wheels. I didn't think cars were made like that anymore. Certainly never dreamt I'd see one. But here it came, with the top down. The driver laughed happily at us, waved to one side, then to the other. He sported a dark blue blazer over a lemon yellow sports shirt with a white silk scarf tucked in the neck. Black hair gleamed above his smooth, round face. His thick lips were red, his nose big and fleshy. A blonde beside him looked straight ahead to avoid our staring eyes. But we weren't looking at her, the driver, or even the unnatural car. We were gaping at a cheetah, which house cat on the back seat, a delicate golden chain round its neck. An old lady in front of me raised her voice. Where does he get the meat for it, I'd like to know. She was dressed in black. After 5 years of war, many ladies were in black. Another lady put a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, ducks. His kind never goes short. War or no war, our boys have to fight, yes, but not them. Oh, dear me, no, never them. They never have to go. Black market, I bet, said the first. No shame at all. Flaunt it in our faces. A woman on the other side of the road raised an umbrella as a weapon and ran into the street. A man pursued her, caught her just before she reached the car. He put his arm round her shoulder, led her back, sobbing to the pavement. The crowd parted for them. The two ladies in front of me clucked in sympathy. Just as well he stopped her, the first said, come down on one of us like a ton of bricks they will if we so much as raise a finger. But you can understand a mother with hungry little tots getting mad at that driver? Yes, said the other, or the poor dear might have just lost a son. Now, we're going to pause at this point for a break. What is the thing you're going to have?
We'll have about